Safran and Delis stomped down, the force of his falling foot sufficient to crush Ceramite into powder. The Jedi beneath him, a young human woman with black hair and pale skin, threw her hands up, shielding herself with her arms, eyes wide with helpless panic. "Olenna!" yelled another one of the Psyker warriors, thrusting his hand forward, shoving her, sending her skidding away just before the armored foot of the Space Marine fell onto her frail body. Safran turned to face the interloper, a brazen man with defiant blue eyes which burned brightly with the reflected light of his azure blade. The Librarian grinned at the man, raising a hand crackling with power. But drawing it back a fraction of an instant later, the limb barely avoiding the touch of 3 more sabers as the Jedi Knights regrouped after his last scattering attack. He kicked off from the ground, reversing the pull of the ship's artificial gravity with his mind, adding to the speed created by his superhuman muscles and powered armor. The recovered Jedi poured into the place he had been like a living, flowing stream of robes and shimmering blades of light. They bounded after him, leaping with eerie silence, each one a Calambian shadowcat bearing their luminescent fangs as they gave chase. In spite of his measures, they reached him before his feet could connect with the domed ceiling above them, falling upon him like neon rain. The Librarian extended his soul, the probing tendrils of his thoughts colliding with the many tranquil surfaces of the minds who sought to end him. They were slow and weak, but given that, their attack was without flaw, and he was forced to act defensively. He swept his force stave out in a wide arc, invisible energy riding the blow and empowering it. Those he struck all managed to get their sabers between themselves and his ruinous staff, but none, not a one, managed to hold their skyborne positions. Instead, those hit were sent flying, hurtling in all directions from the sheer force of the blow. The Space Marine spun the staff back around in time to catch 3 more strikes on the haft of his weapon, pulsing a psychic scream into the warp around him. Some of the Jedi reeled in response as his feet connected with the thick, transparent dome of the ceiling. Grounded, he extended his hand and clenched his fist, releasing a rolling smite into the many Jedi who were milliseconds from falling upon him. His bald gauntlet seemed to explode with crackling power, tendrils of warp lightning spiraling out from him, branching and splitting hundreds of times as it filled the air between he and his myriad foes. But of the many, many Jedi struck, only 3 burned, their screaming forms falling away towards the ground as the others caught the tendrils of warp energy on their lightsabers. Those lengths of light seeming to hum and harmonize with the warp itself. Safran grit his teeth, swiping his staff at the knights and masters who attempted to land atop him, alien power swords leading the way. He thwarted all but 2, the others choosing to land somewhere further away, their own feet adhering to the ceiling much as he seemed to. The 2 sabers which struck him did not breach his holy armor, but rather reduced the glow and strength of the aura he had shrouded himself within. The golden glow diminished, and he punished the 2 offenders for their hubris. The first, a brown-haired woman with several dots on her head, he caught by the ankle as she tried to leap over him, kicking off from his chest after delivering her strike. Simultaneously, he struck at the second with his force staff. The woman in his hand screamed as he crushed her bones in his gauntleted fist, keeping hold of the ruin of her leg as he belted the other with attacks from his weapon. The second offender, a silver-eyed man with a silver cast to his skin, revealed his inhuman nature almost at once. His limbs waved oddly, weaving with his movements like the rolling motions of an alien ocean. He avoided the first 2 strikes and parried the next 2 attacks with his red-hued purple blade. The odd, impish Xenos warrior smiled widely at the Astartes, rolling back into a more standard combat stance and fanning his own fingers. gesturing the Imperial Psyker to bring forth what he had. Safran did so, bellowing laughter of his own as he swept in, striking with not only his glowing staff, but with the screaming, flailing body of the Jedi he had caught. The silver-hued warrior seemed much less eager to engage Safran during the Astartes' onslaught than his demeanor would have suggested, clenching his teeth in sudden panic as he tried to parry only the stave and dodge the still-living form of his companion. And just like that, he lost. The silver-eyed, many-jointed Knight of Jedi successfully evaded or blocked every strike Safran made without further wounding the Jedi the Librarian had been trying to club him with, but had lost that slipperiness that had been saving him from a different kind of attack, as fear and surprise burst the tenuous bubble of his warped defenses. With his last, left-handed swing, the Space Marine tossed the screaming woman towards the man, and instead of retracting his hand, pushed another gout of warp lightning out through it. The howling Jedi was silenced as the bolt tore through her first, ripping up her body, scorching her flesh and robes black even as it tore her apart and sent smoking pieces of the once living Jedi scattering in all directions. The silver-eyed Jedi lasted marginally longer, catching the bolt on his reddish blade as it rent its way out of the dead knight's mouth. But without his emotions in control, the blade's harmonic ring was not enough to catch it all. The stream of lightning split and burst as it met his lightsaber, burning his hands and chest, causing what little focus the warrior had mustered to flee him. His saber exploded, and he was sent hurtling back on a horrific torrent of predatory energy. Saved, barely, from the same fate as the woman before him by the intervention of 3 other Jedi. 2 leapt into the path of the bolt, catching it on their own humming swords of light, while the 3rd caught the man, now falling, and kept him from colliding harshly with the ground. Safran smirked as he began to step back. It mattered not. He highly doubted that Xenos would survive those wounds. The Jedi poured in from around him, moving in streams, leaping and spinning in apparent extravagance, but he knew the truth. They were using their Jedi precognition, waiting for an opening to appear, circling instead of driving in for fear of dedicating to a hopeless assault. He was as an ocean predator, surrounded by a shimmering shoal of desperate fish. Safran's smirk grew all the wider as he sent out his mind, as before, probing for the weakness he sought. This time, it was not long before he found one, a Jedi who felt fear. Without warning, he launched himself into the wall of bodies and blades, Force Stave leading the way. The Jedi bared their teeth against him, sabers flashing, and he caught them on his Force Stave, pulling on the warp to draw those strikes that would have gotten around his guard into the body of his weapon, jostling the Jedi horde as he shoved them away. Their varied bodies flew and spun, some landing back on the floor far below, and some falling back towards the ceiling they dueled on. Either way, they were no longer shielding his target, a single brown-eyed Jedi man. "Saras, look out!" called another Jedi, a woman robed and veiled so heavily that only her face was exposed. Her warning came too late. Safran was upon him in the blink of an eye, swinging down with his stave with both hands. The Jedi raised his saber, legs too stiff to dodge, nerves too frayed to parry. He retained the sense to strengthen his arms and shoulders as he attempted to absorb the metal-shattering force of the Librarian's strike, but had neglected his legs, expecting his wide stance and athletic body to bear the weight of the blow. Instead, his shins shattered under him, and he roared out a scream of blood-bleaching pain, falling up into the air instead of collapsing beneath the haft of Safran's weapon, the focus which had bound him to the ceiling breaking along with his legs. Safran reared his stave back and went to swat the man, only for a blue blade to flash before his eyes, colliding with the stave as he swung and delaying its passage long enough for the struck master to fall safely past. The librarian glared as his eyes followed the blade back to its owner, as the man called Saras fell, legs flagging in the air painfully, keening the whole way down. He and the saber both were caught mid-descent by the same blonde man who had confounded him before. Saras was swiftly added to a growing line of wounded and dying Jedi who were being frantically tended by two others of their order. Safran decided they should tend no longer. As the other Jedi rushed towards him, blades of light cutting a path to the Space Marine, he leapt again, aiming for the line of the wounded. He fell to the steel deck plates like a psychic comet, smashing the metal beneath him and rising almost without pause, rearing to strike the first of the Medicaid Knights with an empowered swing of his staff. His target fell back, eyes wide with fear, helpless before him, and lucky that stronger warriors were nearby. His blow was intercepted and halted by the blades of 3 nearby Jedi, their quivering sabers intersecting the haft of his force weapon, 3 sets of eyes glaring in determined defiance of him. The old man named Sin Draelig was to his left, his single green blade held in a dual defensive grip. His young female student stood to the Imperial Psyker's right, using 2 emerald shafts of light in place of 1 to help hold up the killing blow. And then there was the man directly beneath his staff, brazenly standing above and before Safran's intended target, sky-colored eyes still blazing in the sparking, screeching light of his blue sword. The man used only one hand to hold up the Imperial's attack, arm trembling as he thrust his free fist into Safran's chest. The blow carried with it a stream of raw concussive force, and the librarian was sent skidding back. Safran would have rebounded towards the 3 interlopers, but the sudden rain of falling Jedi all around him caused him to disengage. Attention redirected to the many new opponents rushing to face him. Safran could not help but reflect as he began to pound into the wall of sabers that now assailed him. He had been a librarian of the Crimson Razors for nearly 3 centuries. And despite the falling prestige and regard his brothers afforded the Librarius and Psykers in general, his record had been one of undeniable progression in both power and feats. Now he stood as an epistolary of his chapter, and in his long years of service he had been gifted with the privilege of battling and besting many foes in the Emperor's name. In fact, it had become an intellectual hobby of his to study his enemies and, when combat was joined, compare them to one another. So it was with the veritable swarm of Jedi he now faced. The brilliant, crackling stave he bore was little more than a glowing blur which danced across and around his body. So many radiant blades attempted to fall upon him again and again, and it was not but his motion and the maneuvering of his weapon that kept him a step or 2 ahead of death's luminous reach. Their numbers and the nature of their weapons made them challenging opponents, like Eldar in many ways. Their movements were quick, flowing, and martial, their combat forms nearly artistic, causing them to dance and leap about like performers on a stage. Yet, the Eldar wore Wraithbone battle suits and dedicated their minds and souls to the varied arts of killing and war. These Jedi wore nothing but robes, relying solely on the warp to augment their strength and speed. Had he been facing this many howling banshees, or this many Tyranid warriors, or even this many Kroot shapers, he would not have stood a chance, not without great use of his cunning. But the fact that he was even contending with this many of their number spoke to how unprepared they were for the kind of war he sought to bring them. To add to that, their strikes were fundamentally flawed. Most aimed at disarming or delimbing him in place of pursuing lethal blows. Some of the warriors before him seemed to not suffer from this handicap, but they were in the minority. It would have been infuriating, like fighting a foe who could not take you seriously, were it not backfiring so spectacularly. Slower, less determined, and less lethal, the only things they had left in their favor was their weaponization of the warp and the burning touch of their unique weapons. The varied aliens of the Jedi attempted to grab him, shove him, and bowl him over with the warp, and many times he did not require the use of his own powers to negate those effects. His suit of tailored powered armor proving sufficient by one means or another to nullify all but the most hard-fought efforts. He had taken this to mean that their psyker arts were woefully underdeveloped. However, as the battle dragged on, he soon saw that this was not quite the case. Being an epistolary of his Librarius, Safran knew his endurance was easily twice that of a typical librarian, and that he could project his psychic might in impressive, if specific, ways. Yet even he was feeling the use of his powers weighing on him, his exertions costing his body more and more with each deployment of the warp. Aggravating this, when he reached out to crush the jumping and dodging forms of the Jedi, smiting them with bolts of power or some other psychic aggression, he found the Republic Psykers to be slippery, somehow sliding past the effects of his powers more often than not. His glowing body began to fade as sabers struck his few openings, forcing him to divert his power from the projection of might to the defense of his sacred armor. Again and again they harried him, issuing forth columns of pure force, which he resisted each time he could. Yet, as sweat gathered on his brow, the ones attacking seemed no more drained for the effort they had put forward. Their warp arts were not weaker, but fundamentally different. Bellowing out a wordless challenge, Safran swung right, catching one of the leaping Jedi in mid-flight, breaking his ribs and sending the warrior hurtling away. "Uvil!" yelled Master Sindralig. The elderly warrior leapt, spinning over the Librarian to draw his attention away from the collapsed knight. As he passed overhead, he delivered a silken stroke to the Space Marine's head with his saber, the motion as gentle and smooth as the act of dragging a feather through the air. It was a master stroke, passing neither too quickly or too slowly, falling at just the right moment to connect. Yet, the blade never touched Safran or his armor, skidding across a barrier of blinding light, an armor-mounted refraction field which the Epistolary woke with a simple thought command. Sin grimaced, but remained serene as he landed, the Marine spinning to meet the Master with his staff. The other Jedi backed away somewhat, getting out of the Master's way as they reoriented their attacks to flank Safran while Sin engaged him directly. In response, the Librarian drew in his power and sent out his thoughts, allowing his soul to temporarily permeate the metal of the floor panels around and behind him. When next he sensed the Jedi drive in for him, Safran opened his eyes wide, the blue rings there flashing golden as the metal suddenly became bright as the sun and splashed outward in a molten cascade. Most of the Jedi seemed to sense the danger before it occurred, retreating before the metal reached them. Not so with Seer Junda, whose aggression had overtaken her intuition. She screamed, robes catching fire as the splash washed over her. Still crying out in rictus pain and thrashing wildly, Seer was pulled away by the others of her order and tended to by those among them who knew the healing arts. Meanwhile, Safran did battle with the old master, knowing his technique had allowed him to isolate Draelig for a few precious seconds, though not without cost. The refraction field generator in his armor was smoking, overloaded, as the Jedi Master before him took the half-second of distraction the technique had cost Safran to strike several more times. While the Librarian had blocked 3 of the 5 strikes, the Knight had managed to score 2 more blows, driving the Epistolary's sacred shield into rest once more. The act frustrated the Astartes. This man was far more skilled than the majority of warriors around him, And so he gave the Jedi his full focus as he drove in with his staff. Despite being dressed in nothing more than robes and armed with little more than a sword and the warp, the man comported himself well. But not well enough, for Dreylig soon found himself facing an overwhelming force he could not counter. The Librarian's strength was brutal, mechanical, and anything less than a perfect parry, a perfect deflection, would lead to disaster. Sin found himself challenged like never before, yet his saber was not found wanting, each parry meeting the force stave with just the right amount of might, sliding past with the perfect amount of speed. But as he focused on the stave of the Marine, remembering the lessons of Darth Maul and his saber staff, the Jedi Master would neglect the Marine's actual hands, a mistake which cost him the battle. He locked Safran's weapon perfectly, catching it such that to shift it away would allow the Jedi a killing blow, only to suddenly feel the Marine's free armored fist driving into his stomach with the force of a speeder bike. Despite the defensive sheath of the Force which coated the man, flesh bruised, organs bled, bones shattered, and the Jedi Master was sent breathless from his feet and into the air. But Safran did not pause to savor his victory, and before the wind had been driven out of the Jedi's lungs, the Librarian had already wheeled around, now striking at the head of a Rodian, a would-be hero attempting to avenge the Master's defeat. The blow was only somewhat softened by the intercession of a blue lightsaber, aid from a fellow knight who leapt between them. The blonde man yet again. Unconscious instead of dead, the Jedi he struck fell away and fell out of Safran's thoughts, the Marine already turning and jumping into the air to avoid a flurry of multicolored blades. He roared, slapping his staff down as he spun above them, and being countered as 3 more swords of light rose to catch his weapon. The Space Marine pressed against them, using the Jedi to support his weight as he hefted himself over the warriors who had encircled him. With a heave, he pushed himself away before stomping down, his mind pushing as he issued forth a shockwave of broad, wall-like force which left none standing within 8 feet of him, slippery or not. His preternatural eyes swept the assembled Jedi and spotted a flaw, their weakest link, who had collided with a steel pillar and staggered forward, dazed and clutching his bald head. Safran extended his hand towards the man, making a claw and slashing the air, tearing rents in the fabric of space-time, and allowing ruinous energy to pour forth as writhing bolts of living lightning. The Jedi brought up his saber staff, yellow blades catching 4 of the 5 bolts as he spun his weapon like the rotors of a heli-flyer. The final bolt caught his left arm, causing the Jedi to cry out in obvious and abject pain. Though, to his credit, he did not drop his guard or die, even as half the mass of his struck limb came away as bloody ash. Safran clenched his teeth in frustration, readying another volley to finish the Jedi, but was forced to relinquish his pursuit when another warrior rebounded from the Librarian's shockwave, rushing in to meet him. The man held 2 sabers at once, and was one of the Jedi who did not suffer from their weakness of compassion. Each strike this warrior made was fully intended to kill the Imperial, not maim him. "Your madness ends now!" the Master bellowed, whirling like a death cult assassin. The Crimson Razor's epistolary focused, intent on not allowing the same mistake as before to foul his technique. This time, as the Jedi Knights charged him from all sides, with Master Malicos leading from the front, Safran chose a different tactic. He drank in the warp once more, siphoning it into his body and mind, flushing himself with it. His already prodigious strength and speed increased to absurd levels, something he displayed as the Jedi all closed in. The Astartes Psyker became a blur of motion, the immaterium spilling out from him and violating the very laws of reality itself. He blocked, dodged, and countered, dedicating himself fully to defense as he remained within the center of the storm of Jedi who raged around him. He knew he could not last, knew he had put himself into a grinder, and that he could exist no more than a few seconds under such a prolonged assault. But he only needed a few seconds. Catching one of Malicos' sabers on his staff, he slid the blade of light down along the weapon and into the path of another Jedi. Neither one of them was quick enough to avoid what would happen next. Jedi Knight Travis screamed, his arm coming away in a jagged cut as Master Malicos' lightsaber was maneuvered into him. Malicos and the others were stunned by the sudden turn, affording the Librarian the opening he had been waiting for. Safran released his staff from his left hand, swiping it out wide with his right arm while his left arm extended out to grasp one of the leaping warriors by the collar. His right-handed swing screamed through the air before it connected with Master Malicos, but was parried again. This time, however, the Jedi was caught utterly off balance, throwing the Psyker swordsman he had struck back several feet and leaving him gasping for breath as he cradled the arm he'd used, the limb now broken. The one he had caught in his left hand made to take off his arm, but Safran never paused to give her the time to act, throwing the Forceborn warrior into the metal ground and swinging down his stave to crush her flat against it. She was saved from an insect's fate as an airborne blue sword of light intercepted the Librarian's strike and managed to resist and divert his strength away to one side. Yet even so, the Jedi on the ground was clearly not fit to fight any longer, and as such, was forgotten less than a second later as Safran continued his ceaseless assault and counter-striking. The golden glow completely faded from him, the power needed for it expended as two more sabers glanced off his back, reflected by the power of the Librarian's mind alone. Safran could feel acrid sweat stinging his eyes and running down his face, could taste it. He had not been made to dance this long in many, many cycles, and while the Jedi were sorry foes for him individually, they were just challenging enough to make him wary. Very few of their number remained after 5 minutes, and fewer still after 7. But it was at the 8-minute mark that Safran truly realized that something was horribly amiss. Frustratingly, the answer to what exactly that was managed to elude his cunning for a shamefully long time. He was winning. He could feel that, see that, and yet, somehow, he was losing the sense that he had control of this fight. But why? From where was this sensation coming? The Space Marine reared up before stomping down his leg, quaking the entire orrery and shaking most of its occupants to the ground as his soul struck the metal of the ship, ringing it like a bell. The disturbance sent the remaining Jedi stumbling, a stagger he hoped to turn into a massacre, bursting the metal around those who surrounded him with a pained flex of his thoughts, molten metal spilling out from where they stood. Infuriatingly, only one was caught this way, the others leaping away ahead of the sprays, and the single struck Jedi also leapt away and pulsed, releasing a wave of force from their body which freed them from the searing grip of the molten steel. Though none of them had died from that attack, the others were slow to approach, likely wary after seeing their stricken compatriot limping away, or, more accurately, the many deep burns which raked over their smoking body. Taking that moment to backtrack and look around, Safran scanned his enhanced eyes from side to side. The groaning, slumped forms of the Jedi he had been battling lay scattered about the enormous room, some lying where they dropped, others leaning or sitting against pillars or walls. And he saw for the first time that nearly all of them had managed to remain alive. The epiphany sent shards of ice into the veins of the venerable warrior. He briefly wondered if it was possible that he had been holding back, restraining himself without realizing it. The thought was laughable. When it came to dealing death, Safran barely understood the meaning of restraint. Growling like a canid, he shoved forward his palm in an exertion of power, blowing away the scant few combatants which yet remained before him. Two were taken into the walls by the sudden outpouring of force, and fell with heavy thunks, crushed but breathing, to the metal deck. In that instant, as he looked over who remained, both his mind and eyes simultaneously understood the true threat he had been facing, and that the battle would only earnestly begin now. In his memory, he could see it, the factor, the difference between the Jedi who had survived here and the Jedi he had murdered in the past. A single blue blade. Each time he had made to kill one of the Jedi, there had been a chance it would appear, saving his victim from certain death by interceding in the last possible moment. Safran had wounded, he had maimed, and indeed, many would yet succumb to the damage he had dealt. But few lay still, never to rise again, as he had been denied by the blue blade his rightful glory. And there, before him, not in his memory, but in the sight of his true eyes, stood the bearer of that blade. A Jedi Knight, a human man. He had seen him time and time again, but only now took true notice. The Jedi looked grim, yet not unkind. His azure eyes were fierce, but his posture remained defensive. And unlike most of his kin, he wore armor and a soldier's determination. Despite having intercepted many of Safran's own blows, he had never chosen to engage the Astartes himself earnestly. He had, the Librarian realized, been allowing the knights around him to wear their opponent down, while he busied himself with denying Safran the death he sought to unleash on them. The old Marine felt himself almost blush. What an oversight! The last pack of Psyker warriors had contained nothing like this man, and so Safran had failed to truly see him and what he represented. The jibes he would receive from the Marines of the Skywatch, should he ever be unlucky enough to encounter any who knew of this, would be never-ending. However, this was now at an end, something Safran made known to the man as the massive Librarian oriented his stance in the Jedi's direction. The blue blade-wielding master seemed to notice the change and raised his free hand, drawing the attention of the remaining Jedi he fought beside. "Sarah, hold back now. Gather your strength and tend to Master Drelig," he said. You can't be serious," the knight named Sarah said, panting hard, her arms drooping as she tried to hold a combat stance, her twin sabers of green humming beneath her. The Marine grinned at the two Psyker warriors and began to stride forward, heavy, smoking boots thunking loudly against the floor. "I am, and I have no time to argue. You are exhausted and you are not yet Master Draelig's equal. Go to him, make sure he lives to finish your training," said the blue-eyed master. Sarah hesitated, saying nothing, but reluctant to admit defeat after having made it so far. Safran did not slow. "Now, Sarah!" the master snapped, and that seemed to be enough to push her to obey. She gave a quick nod, deactivating her blades and turning back to run to her master. Safran nearly went to pursue the woman, but was held back. Seeing the remaining Jedi's stance shift subtly, and feeling the cold promise of a sudden premonition. Had Safran given chase just then, the night before him would have destroyed him in 40 of 78 futures. Perhaps an intricate deception by the Jedi he now faced. Some form of warped trickery Safran had yet to encounter. But just the chance that such futures could have come to pass was enough to give the veteran Astartes pause.
"You are skilled in the art of defense. Defense of others and defense of yourself. The Blood Angels would likely value such arts as those you display,"
the Librarian said, edging to the left of the man, watching as the warrior before him moved to the right in response. Safran eyed the warrior up and down, absorbing the details of his movements, learning him even as he did the same back. The Jedi grinned a sour smile at the Librarian, sweat sheening his face as well. Clearly, part of the reason he had not engaged Safran was because simply defending his comrades had been all he could manage to do without exposing himself to the very danger he sought to mitigate. Had the man borne the benefits of powered armor, had he been a space marine himself, his potential would have been catastrophic. As of now, it was just enough to make Safran eager for the contest that was about to begin. Normally, I'd take that as a compliment, but coming from people like you, I'd prefer to remain as unvalued as possible. No offense, the Jedi said in response to the Imperial, spinning his blade up and over his head, his offhand aimed towards Safran, 2 fingers extended.
That is a pity, Jedi. You are human. I can smell this, see this. There may be much we might learn from one another. If you submit yourself before the Emperor, I cannot promise safety for your Xenos associates, nor kindness to your apostate witches. But there may be a place for you and your skill if you show the wisdom to submit,
said Safran. The Jedi scowled, and Safran wrinkled his nose in a cruel smile. They both understood that the Marine's play at civility was all but an open insult. Thanks, but I think I'll pass. I've only ever had one place, and trust me, if you are any indication, then your Emperor would make a lousy Jedi. I doubt the Council would allow him to join the Order, so it's out of the question that I could train him. Safran bore a hideous grin and stepped closer, hatred pouring from the Astartes in nearly palpable waves.
I doubt you could train the least of my brothers, even were you willing. However, I am not such a miser as you.
He growled, drawing in the warp, his battle-crafted flesh tensing within his armor as he filled himself with the ruinous powers of the Immaterium.
Come closer, Jedi, and I'll teach you something new.
Mace looked around at the survivors of his assault. Jedi lay about him, their bodies mingled with those of the choir they had come to silence and their ample guards. Most of his order yet lived, but those who remained had suffered terribly at the hands of the Imperials. Here, Master Windu had discovered that, to the Imperium, those skilled in the use of the Force were little better than communications relays and weapons. This had been demonstrated with horrifying potency during his attack on their communications hub, where 4 sensitives called astropaths sent telepathic communications to and from different choirs. The astropaths of the Imperium had not been civilians or non-combatants, however, and the moment Mace and his warriors entered the room, they turned their wretched minds upon the Jedi, confounding them, invading their souls, and sickening their thoughts, making them vulnerable to the average soldiers who had been ready and waiting to defend their astropaths. While the battle had not been a slaughter, he could now count the Jedi who could continue to fight with him on one hand. The rest were either too wounded, needed to help the wounded, or were simply mentally shattered by the odd, thought-rending techniques used by the choir's most powerful members. The sight of their gibbering lips, pale faces, and trembling eyes still haunted the Master, and would haunt him for as long as he lived. Beneath his boot, the last of the insane Imperial Force users breathed his last wretched breath, finally going still and remaining that way. The wounded helped each other up, limping and staggering their way back towards their dropships, evacuating to await rescue by the Republic, or for the Imperial ship to fall properly into their hands. The sight was equal parts humbling and infuriating. Windu had long considered the Sith to be the only possible competitors with the Jedi when it came to their use, knowledge, and power with the Force. But how certainly could he assert that now, after all of this? This new faction was not only a powerful martial threat, but a metaphysical menace as well. He felt a hand come to rest on his shoulder and looked back, seeing what remained of his strike force. Jedi Master Depa Billaba met his eyes, her steel serene gaze only slightly tainted by the thin light rings of red and orange which circled the very edges of her eyes. Like the embers closing around a burning leaf, subtle but still there. He did not doubt that he had the same look in his own eyes, if not worse, for he and she had used Vapad this day, and used it excessively to survive. Though physically unharmed, they were both spiritually drained. But Windu was under no illusions, and the battle was far from done. All over the ship, the strike forces of the Jedi were encountering resistance, the Imperium having neither adapted to their assault or deployed adequate forces to stall or counter them. Many strike forces were now broadcasting distress throughout the ship, some more intensely than others. Now freed of their primary objective, and needing to link up with a larger force, it was time he and his found a group nearby to aid and ultimately lead to the bridge. Depa's grip tightened slightly, and he laid his hand over hers, giving a squeeze of his own, letting her know he was still present, still thinking. Looking beyond her, he could see Jedi Master Nu standing straight-backed, a long, rectangular box slung over her shoulder on a strap. Behind her approached the lumbering form of Master Tapal, and nearby, Master Ali stood up from where she had been tending to a fallen knight. Including himself, that left just the 5 of them ready to move on. "We must keep moving, Master Windu," said Jaro Tapal, the Lasat's muscles rippling under his armor, the predator within him having been awakened and working since the battle had been joined. "Yes, to the bridge," Depa said, withdrawing her hand from Mace's, her other hand gripping her still lit lightsaber all the more tightly. "Unwise," said Master Nu. The elderly woman kept her face stern yet impassive as she continued. "We are vastly depleted. Going straight to the bridge would leave us at a severe disadvantage, especially considering that their defense of that location should be about equal to their defense of this one," she said. Depa grit her teeth, but Windu raised his hand, forestalling any response. "Master Jocasta Nu is correct," he said. "Let us rendezvous with another strike force, a potent one. Then we can take the bridge in one push." Depa frowned at first, but smiled at the idea of taking the enemy's command position in one violent strike. Though Mace empathized, he could still not help but worry. Depa, all of them in fact, had seen too many Jedi be broken to not be affected by it. They were all coping in their own way, many Jedi resorting to liberal flash burning of their memories. But even among them all, he and Master Billaba were at special risk. He hoped she remembered that as they moved forward. "Very well, I believe we were relatively close to Master Kenobi's strike force," said Master Ali. "They will do nicely. Well done. Let us contact him and set up a meet," said Master Windu, closing his eyes, turning within himself and then without. They all paused with him, reaching out with their minds and seeking Obi-Wan and his group. What they sensed a moment later shocked them all. Those lightsabers which had not been ignited now sprang to life, and the masters opened their eyes. "What do we do?" asked Master Ali. "The answer is as clear as the path laid before us. We go to them, we confront whatever menace this is, and we fight," said Master Tapal. Jocasta and Depa both looked towards Mace, who only hesitated for a fraction of a second before giving a stiff nod. As Master Tapal said, "Let us go, now, before it is too late."
lust for another dollar in your pocket. Now I am the violence, I am the sickness. Won't accept your silence, beg me for forgiveness. We'll never get free, lamb to the slaughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? The price of your greed, your son and your daughter. What you gonna do when there's blood in the water? When there's blood in the water.
Hey there, fellow fans. Fan with too much time here. Very happy to say that I'm not on the brink of falling to pieces on the end of this one. Luckily, I didn't have to stay up nearly as late. I can proudly say that it is only about 10:30, and that means that as I'm finishing this video, it is much earlier than I'm used to finishing it, which is much closer to like 3 or something. So, I've heard what you guys have to say about the polls, and I'll go ahead and keep the polls just to myself at this point. And we'll go ahead and see if we can't find other ways to interact with the story in Season 2, but we'll keep it out of the survival polls range for now. So, with that being said, let's move on to what you're probably here for, the Q&As. So, let's go ahead and look. And take a look. Let's see. Alright. Oh, yes, I remember this. Okay, let's go ahead and address this right now. So this is being mostly addressed to let's see here. What's your name? Eat Your Soul, the Num Nums. So Eat Your Soul. I am very happy that you are here with us on this story, and I am very happy that you seem to be enjoying at least most of the story I have to tell, despite some of your misgivings. That being said, I must ask that you stop spamming my chat and my comment section with this argument of yours that the warp and the force are not the same thing. I respect the opinion that you have. I ask that you respect mine and understand that I'm not even writing for the canon, so it's not like a very big contentious issue. But none of the arguments that I've seen you make have as yet convinced me that I should reconsider that the Force is simply the Sea of Souls without the War in Heaven having destroyed it and corrupted it and turned it all to the dark side. Now, I will go ahead and respect you with at least 3 responses to why I do believe that it is that the Force is the netherworld of the Force, but whether these responses convince you or not, I do ask that you respect my opinion and just let this drop. So, firstly, the Force has a location. Like, there is a place that the Force resides. It's called the netherworld of the Force. And it's very significant that this place exists, for many reasons. For one thing, the souls of the dead seem to reside here. For another, time and space are bent and manipulated here. The Ang-Ti monks travel through this place using an actual form of manual warp travel to move almost instantaneously between two locations. And that's how their ships work. They don't have hyperdrives, they just use this force technique. In addition to that, Darth Vader goes through a great deal of trouble and even resurrects an ancient Darth Lord, Lord Momin, who, by the way, you should definitely look him up if you don't know who Lord Momin is. He is definitely my favorite Sith Lord from the new Disney canon, and he is just fantastically well done. Also, the way that Darth Momin describes the Force, because Darth Momin is in love with the dark side. Like, he has a romantic love with the dark side, and he commits atrocities and genocides as courted, like almost as like pieces of art that are meant to be witnessed by the dark side and almost courted by the dark side. So the things he has to say and his illuminations on what the dark side is in the Disney canon only lead me to further believe that it is the nascent consciousness of things that will become dark gods. But to leave that aside for now, Darth Vader uses and employs Lord Momin's help to create an actual portal directly into the warp. I mean, the netherworld of the Force. And once he goes within it, he's able to see the past, the future, his own soul, the souls of the dead. He does battle with entities there. He actually encounters Padme's soul there, and Padme's soul is unable to recognize him as Anakin Skywalker. And several other things happen as well. All of these things lead me to believe that this is simply the Sea of Souls. And that's like big reason number one. Big reason number two is that there is a webway running through it. So in Star Wars Rebels, we are introduced to a temple of the Jedi that is made using these very bizarre depictions and images of the Father, the Son, and the Daughter, who are very powerful Force wielders. They are, what are they called again? They're not the Wills. They're very powerful beings. The name escapes me right now, but it's not a name that's very hard to find. I really should. They're the ones. There's actually another name for them too. They made Center Point Station and other things like that. But the point is that this temple, once opened, doesn't lead into a structure as you would think, but rather it leads into a space between spaces. When this space between spaces is shown to us, it looks a lot like what you might imagine a depiction of the webway, except maybe not made by the old ones, but what it might look like. It is pathways linking not only different places together across the galaxy, but different times as well. Clearly not so much like the webway in that fashion, but of course not made by the old ones or the Eldar. This place allows you to not only traverse time and space, but really clearly use gateways to teleport from one place to another. Not only that, but the location that this webway is built inside of is very clearly a tamed and calm section of the nether world of the Force. All very tremendously interesting, and I encourage you to look this up because I think that it will change your current perspective on what the Force is and what it might be. Now I'll say this, maybe when the Jedi say the Force, their definition of that encompasses more things than the warp, and the warp only encompasses a limited amount of things, and maybe in that way they're not quite the same thing. But certainly when you say the warp and you say the Force, there's a great deal of overlap at least. Finally, the very last reason I will say empirically why I believe that the Force is almost identical to the warp as the Sea of Souls is because in Star Wars Legends, not just canon, which has everything I've spoken of up till now has all been about canon. In Legends, the netherworld of the Force is also very clearly mentioned, referenced, traversed, and explored. In fact, much more so than in the current canon, which is doing so just very clearly and on screen. But in Legends, we had the netherworld, and in the netherworld of the Force, you had locations. And in one of these locations, you had a place that was literally called the Chaos. And what the chaos was a section of the Force that had been completely ruined by the dark side, where all of the howling dark spirits of the Sith who attempted immortality reside. Not only that, but several dark entities come from this place. And these entities have been known to possess people. And like when they possess people, they don't do nice things. They usually kill everyone in the ship that with the person they possessed, and then kill the whole crew and themselves. Clearly nascent demonic entities, even if they're not, meant to be that way from the perspective of the writers who wrote that. That is like very clearly what they can be and what they are for the sake of this, of this writing. So those are like some of the big reasons why I believe the things that I believe. And honestly, right now, those things aren't really going to change. I understand that you see the warp as being fundamentally unnatural, and that what the Emperor emits is different. To that I would say, that's just the dichotomy between the light side and the dark side. The dark side, as explained by George Lucas on camera, and again, please check me on this and please look this up and we can debate this. If I'm wrong on any of this, please check me, show me that I'm wrong, and that will change my opinion and will put me in a different place. But George Lucas says that the dark side is not emotions, it isn't even like feeling bad, really. The dark side is imbalance. The dark side is extremity. The dark side is just the Force out of balance. The light side isn't necessarily goodness and all that is good. It's just balance. It is just balance. So when you see the Emperor emit the Force out, he could just be emitting balance. And balance is doing what it always does to chaos. It's destroying it. It's utterly wrecking it. And that's the dichotomy that you're seeing as so far as my theory goes. The warp is unnatural, it is unbalanced, it is chaos, and George Lucas says that is what the dark side is. It is unbalanced, it is chaos, and it is unnatural, and that is why it is definably evil and needs to be stopped. You can't double-side it. That's why the concept of Grey Jedi doesn't work in the new canon, because they've really doubled down on George Lucas's interpretation of what the light side and dark side are supposed to actually be. So, those are like, I think I've gone on at length about why it is that I believe that to be the case. And again, the last thing I'll say about that is that you mentioned here that there's a low case of mutation in the galaxy. That's just because the warp isn't the warp yet. It's the Sea of Souls. The warp was ruined into becoming what it is. And you can actually see Force mutations occur in Star Wars. In places where the dark side is powerful, creatures become larger and more fearsome and naturally bloodthirsty. Not only that, but they often evolve into distinct species. This is how we got dark side dragons. Not only that, but the Sith themselves experiment by exposing creatures to the raw dark side of the Force through a process called Sith alchemy. And the creations they create look like mutations, like heavily powerful warp spawned mutations. So I encourage you to look up Sith alchemy and look at the results of that, and look at how Sith alchemy works. It's sorcery, and it's chaos sorcery at that, and it has a very chaos sorcery effect. All these things are present, they're just not nearly as profuse. They aren't anywhere near as common, and that's because in Star Wars there isn't anywhere near as devastating a continuous state of conflict as is present in the 40k universe. And with that, I'll go ahead and put it down. You don't have to agree with me, but I would ask that you respect my opinion and just let it drop. So here we go. Moving on to the first proper Q&A that has the Q&A in the title. Is Captain Rex in this... by the way, this is the Anime Guy RWBY Critics Podcast. Q&A. Is Captain Rex dead in this episode? No, he is not. You'll actually notice that when Ahsoka tells Captain Rex what her intention is with the Tech Priest, he asks her if she would like him to tag along with her.
and she decides that it's best if he stays and secures the bridge to make sure it can't be taken out from underneath them. Because if she's gone and Rex is gone, that sort of leaves the command structures a little debilitated, and she'd like to make sure the bridge stays in their control. So Rex is on the bridge, and he's safe. Is there going to be a point in the war where the Gar start recruiting normal people? And, okay, yeah. Most likely, yes, but you have to remember that the Grand Army of the Republic, rather the Republic itself, is by design, by Palpatine's design, caught up in gridlock, which is an actual tactic that real-world dictators use to convince people that republics don't work. They'll get either a party or enough power within the system to cause gridlock and then just choke the system until people agree to succumb to dictatorship. And that's a huge part of what Palpatine did to seize control of the Republic. That's working against him now because it means that common sense decisions like the one you're talking about take much longer to come to and make. But certainly you will see elements of that, if nothing else, especially going into Season 2. Let me see here. Did you have any more? Nope, that looks like about it. So, yep, those are those questions, and I'll go ahead and move on to the next one. Hatter. Alright, hey there, Hatter. Q&A. With all the magic Imperial Psychers used in battle, I'm interested to see how the Jedi will respond. Okay, so, two things about this. One, the Jedi are used to finding other Force cultures that can do things with the Force that they either haven't discovered or don't think is ethical. So, throwing fireballs and things like that is actually something they have seen the Shapers of Kor do. And I might be saying that name wrong, but the Shapers of something certainly. They might not be the Shapers of Kor, but the Shapers are a Force cult that exists somewhere in the galaxy that the Jedi came in contact with and have recorded in their archives. And they can throw fireballs and effectively earthbend and do all kinds of elemental abilities. So that wouldn't freak them out so much. Like, what freaks them out about the Imperials isn't the fact they're a Force tradition that can do different things from them, because they encounter that quite a lot, actually. It's not nearly as rare as you might think. What freaks them out is that they're so Sith-like, and they're helping this Empire, and they're really violent, and of course, the things that their abilities are able to do are really heinous. But they're not very shocked by the very act and phenomenon in and of itself. As for how are the Jedi going to react to all the trauma they're getting hit with, two words: flashburn. And Ayla herself, funny enough, is particularly skilled in this technique and has used it before to save her mind from things. Flashburning, and I encourage you to go ahead and type in flashburn Jedi power into your YouTube search bar and go ahead and just look it up. Flashburn is a power that is available to most Jedi, though not that many I think are trained in it, but it's actually not that hard to do. That is simply a telepathic power where a Jedi performs a self-administered mind wipe. The differences are that it's much cleaner, it's much safer, and the memory isn't really gone, it's just locked away so that the Jedi can go and deal with it later. And this is actually made specifically to counter Sith, who would use these kinds of technique to destroy a Jedi's focus and connection to the light side. And the way that the Jedi would counter it is by just putting it away, forgetting it, thereby negating it, and dealing with it later once the battle is over. Now, if a Jedi does not choose to deal with it, then after a few weeks, this becomes a real problem and begins to completely destroy their connection to the Force by having this unresolved issue in their subconscious. However, in the moment, this is how Jedi are able to get around it. So you will actually see Jedi being able to use this technique to keep going far beyond what they would have been able to after they've been hit with certain traumatizing attacks. And you will also see Ayla use this because Ayla, like I stated before, has actually canonically used this technique, I think twice, but at least once for certain. So moving on from that, let me see. Excuse me. Damon Host. Okay, so yes, there will be some chaos corruption in this galaxy at some point. It wouldn't quite be 40k if we didn't include some of it, though. Include some of that in here. Though, do keep in mind a few things. Firstly, if a daemon gets loose in the Force, like they kill this Damon Host and he got loose and he's in the Force now, like the warp, most daemons are going to die very quickly in this environment, because this environment, unless they're able to find the chaos and reside within it very quickly, is like toxic to them. They are daemons that are used to existing in a warp that is so dark side that even to exist in neutrality would destroy them. Now, there are exceptions to this. If a daemon is powerful enough, then it can hold itself out and just gradually get weaker and weaker as opposed to be destroyed. Of course, it would be rushing to find the chaos, or rushing to find a new host by which it can separate itself from this environment. If you drop the whole Chaos God in, it would be totally different. It would be a very, very different situation. The Chaos God would be weaker than it would be in Warhammer by technicality, but in practicality and in the expression of its power, it would be many millions of times stronger because its hands aren't tied by the other three. So that's how that kind of dynamic would end up working out. But insofar as normal daemons are concerned, it won't be as instantaneously over as you might think, because the daemons will be dampened by the fact that the warp and the force here are not super corrupted and tainted as of yet. In fact, as opposed to going out on the street and just preaching words of chaos to people that would just corrupt them in their sleep, because the warp is just intuitively that way in Warhammer 40k, the initial things that daemons and demonic forces would actually try to do in the world, most likely, is in addition to spreading a legit faith that is spread through the normal methods that could be conducive to chaos, what they would be doing is trying to create more genocide, more actual chaos, more catastrophes, more death, more suffering, more extremity, because that would go a long way into changing this environment. Because for daemons of chaos jumping from the warp in 40k to the Sea of Souls in Star Wars, it would be very close to what it would be like for a saltwater fish to jump into a freshwater setting all at once. They'd be lucky to survive, and they'd have to be pretty powerful to do it. With the exception, of course, being that there's a good chance, there is a chance they find the chaos before they are destroyed, and they could reside comfortably within that section of the warp, though they would also be tremendously limited by it and only able to have presence in places where the dark side is very strong. And you see locations like that in Star Wars, such as the cave where Luke had to face Darth Vader Luke in the trials that he was doing with Yoda in the second movie. But there you go. So let me see here. Will we see Ahsoka and the Electro Police again, mixing blue and orange? Fucking heretic! God damn it, you people. He's fucking horn dogs. I better not see any of this, okay? Like, straight up. This idea of Ahsoka getting together with the Electro Priest better stay in a wholesome ship and nothing else, because the very suggestion of anything else would make the Electro Priest himself violently ill. And Ahsoka, I will remind you, this is still the Clone Wars. What is she, like 16? Get your minds out of the gutter, guys. Come on, let's not have that. Freaking anything down here. Alright, let's see. Next question. Crypto Penguin. Hey there. Q&A. Since we probably won't see Mandalorian's view come into the story, I'll just ask for... Okay. So the Mandalorians. I don't actually want to get too much into how they are, because that's going to come into play in Season 2, and I think it'll be more fun for you guys to just wait and see the execution of that. So I'm going to leave that there. You'll see, but trust me, it's going to be interesting to see how Mandalorian culture mixes, what they try to do with the Imperium, what the Imperium tries to do with them, and where all of that turns out. There you go. Let's go on to your second question then. Also, just for some clarification, we know that there's about 500 warships of the Imperium, but I remember you saying that there were refugee ships. There are literally billions of tugboats and carriers that are just civilian ships coming with us to the Star Wars galaxy. Literally billions. And I know that there are going to be people who are saying, billions? Then that means that there's trillions of humans coming. And yeah, there are. And that's not going to put a dent in the Star Wars population. There's literally, there should be at least, literally quintillions of people living on Coruscant. And by that logic, because Axum is only supposed to be, marginally smaller than Coruscant and more or less the same thing, there should be quintillions of people living on Axum right now as this battle goes on. Star Wars, like, I don't intend to use stupidly small, unrealistic numbers when it comes to the populations of hive cities and accumulopolises in Star Wars and 40K. So when you hear trillions, yes, trillions, because I need to have hive worlds get built, I need to have forge worlds get built, I need to have fortress worlds get built, I need to have shrine worlds get built, I need to give the Imperium a little section of space that's going to look like the Imperium and allow Imperial culture to persist without it being immediately diluted and destroyed by immersion into the Star Wars universe. And for that, I'm going to need trillions of people, because trillions is not a lot. Like, you think it's a lot, it sounds like a lot. Trillions of people could all go on one planet. In fact, there may be even more than trillions, who knows, maybe hundreds of trillions. There's going to be enough people to fill out these planets and give the Imperium a little foothold, and most of these ships are going to be dismantled to be used as materials to build these cities and these places and these facilities up with. But yes, there are trillions. I'm sorry if I sound a little hostile, because I have actually, like, back when I had this out on the discussions tab, I had some actually really hostile responses to me asserting this. And I understand why it's there, and I understand why the human mind can't really understand and wrap itself around those numbers. I do get that, but understand me and believe me when I tell you that there are trillions, and there are that there are billions of these ships. There are trillions of people coming with them, and that is not in any way going to destabilize the population of the Star Wars universe. Galactic populations are simply not budged by numbers like that. It's just not the case. So, moving on from that. And again, no hostility towards you, Crypto Penguin. This is more pent-up stuff from me. So, in any case, moving on from that question. Spook! Hey, Spook! Alright, let's see. These are the questions that you didn't get to post last time. Alright, so let's go ahead and start looking at these. Titans, especially the Emperor-class Titans, have very wobbly numbers, as low as 40 meters tall in some, as high as 200 plus meters in others, and you prefer them at 500 meters. There are depictions of Titans using mountains as cover as they fire at each other. That's what I want to go with. Titans are literally called god machines. They are remnants from the Dark Age of technology when mankind can time travel and literally fire chronal beams that would make you occupy time and space in, like, freaking odd ways and destroy you in odd soul-destroying ways and stuff. Like, literally, they come from a time where, like, we should be able to, like, genetically engineer Godzillas for fun as, like, pets for our equivalent of High Lords during the Dark Age of technology. So I definitely side with the largest of the Titans being very, very large. That is very 40k to me. I feel no reason nor have any logic to soften that or dumb it down. And yeah, like Emperor-class Titans are enormous because they are the biggest Titans. So I like that. I can't give you a full dead-on answer for certain because I'd need to see scales to know quite how big 500 meters tall is. So I don't want to say anything too silly. But I feel that I at least in spirit agree with that statement. Alright, so let's see here. Imperial warships. They can go 20 to 80% the speed of light. Custodial white scars shifted in 95%. Okay, and they're going to have one constant speed or variable speed. Okay, so you're asking if the different ships in the Imperial Navy will have variable speeds. They will have variable speeds. In fact, if you go and you look up the list of Imperial ships that have come along from the Sectic sector in the in Battlefleet Zectech, what you will find is that there are actually like a murder class and an aggressor class cruisers. I could be saying those names wrong. So the point that they're supposed to be very fast, large ships. They are there, and their definitions will not be negated. They certainly will be able to move that fast. That being said, it will be the case that most of the time you see the Imperial ships moving as a single unit in cohesion with each other, and that's because it simply works better to move in formation and to fire in that kind of way and to not move like too quickly into the enemy's firing position without having other ships to help spread the enemy fire out. But when ships need to, they will break from their standard speeds of moving alongside with the rest of the Navy, and be broken into battle groups of faster ships, or occasionally simply use their own personal ship speed in the midst of combat to execute combat maneuvers. And you will see that. So, in direct response to that question, all of the ships will have different variable speeds according to what kind of ship class they are. While they will tend to move together in units and blocks, they will certainly not be tied down to one constant speed. Will the Imperium be able to get the Star Wars communication FTL technologies? Okay, so the problem with the Imperium and adapting a lot of the Star Wars technologies is going to come down to that their computers are too advanced. And I mean the Star Wars computers. A Navicomputer is basically a droid brain. It's just a droid brain that isn't interested in talking to you. It's only interested in plotting out Navicomputers. But it is a digital thinking computer that is really smart and really complicated. And when the mechanics get a hold of it, they're going to be like, okay, to use hyperdrives, we have to use Navicomputers, but they're too smart to use. So they're either going to have to dumb them down and make them much more like the KOTOR computers, like Navicomputers that you saw, which were way, way more restricted, or they're going to have to work a different way around them, or figure out a way of creating a servitor, like a hyperdrive servitor, that would be able to perform those calculations in place of a droid, or anything that's too smart and purely mechanical. And this is going to apply to a lot of their technologies, including their communications technology. Let me see, what else? Will the Star Wars faction be able to get Imperial weaponry? Yes. Anything that they can pick up and take, they will get access to. Now, will it be easy for them to get a hold of a Space Marine's corpse? No. If they get a hold of a Space Marine's corpse and the Space Marines count that that they're short a corpse, will the Space Marines just let them have a Space Marine corpse without trying to get it back? No. But provided they can get one, and provided they can keep it and pull it into a lab, they will be able to pull it apart and start figuring it out. I know that a lot of people criticize the Star Wars galaxy as having stagnant technological growth. However, every single time that you see literally any Star Wars science initiative begin, it ends with some amount of success. It never ends in failure, and it never takes a very long time. The moment that a Star Wars science division gets put together with a goal, they very, very quickly begin producing results. And the only time you hear about slow results is when you're hearing about really unreasonable Imperial timetables. The fact that the Death Star got researched and put together in the course of a little over 20 years is mind-blowing. The fact that the Death Star was made even bigger and more powerful with only like right afterwards and then basically rebuilt is even more nuts. The fact that they then took the technology and remade it into something that could fire through hyperspace and literally make it into a planet-sized battle station should speak for itself. And of course, that's not even going into the fact that, again, Star Wars is the same universe where you can solve magic with science by curing the Rakghoul plague with just plain old medicine. So, suffice to say that the stagnancy argument doesn't hold a lot of water with me. What it seems to be more the case is that the Star Wars galaxy inherited a lot of weapons from the Rakatan Empire, reverse engineered a lot of it, and then just kind of sat on it without anyone in particular, for various reasons, wanting to increase the power of these weapons. For the Jedi and the Sith, it's very obvious why. And the Jedi and the Sith are actually always technologically advancing, but they don't advance the way that you would think. They advance with the Force, like with Force weapons. So the Sith make all these Force Doomsday devices, Jedi make lightsaber rifles, and that's kind of how their technology advances, and all that stuff is extremely potent and extremely great. But also extremely real, and it also speaks against the idea that the Star Wars galaxy is technologically stagnant. It's just weird. So, moving on from that. Finally, my last question relates to the uncountable factions of the Imperium. Okay. Will the Crimson Razors get a dossier the same way the Skywatch did? Maybe, but probably not. The Crimson Razors don't have as much to say as the Skywatch do. They were a very, very, very melee... No, my bad. They were a very basic Crimson's... They were a very basic Imperial Fists chapter until they experienced several events that have made them enamored with the Black Templars, and specifically with Helbrecht and the way that he runs things. Because of this, they have begun to culturally emulate within their chapter the structure and policies of the Black Templars. That is probably the most unique thing about them. Aside from that, they're pretty by the numbers. They may get dossiers, but the dossiers would not be of the same length because there simply isn't nearly as much deviancy in the Crimson Razors as there is within the Skywatch. So let me see here. What are the chapters, regiments, and covenants present within the forces of the Imperium? Okay, off the top of my head, and as quickly as I can, because already I can already feel that this is gonna that I've been talking for a good minute now, right? So the chapters that are present in full force, for certain, are the Crimson Razors, the Skywatch, and the Tempered Hands. The chapters that are here represented by fire teams, squads, or maybe less, are the Blood Angels. My bad. I'm going to be very vague about this because I actually have a list, but I don't have that list here in front of me, so I don't want to missay names or give you people that aren't actually here, or miss people on purpose that are here. So, I mean, not on purpose, but by accident. Blood Angel successors are here. There are Ultramarine successors here. Elements of the Salamanders chapter made it here. There are elements of the, what do you call them? The Red Scars, or the Crimson Scars. I forget what their names are now. My brain is just farting on that. They're here. There are Ultramarine successors here. I don't know if I said that already. There are, quite a few. There are quite a few. They equal out to about a little over 800 Space Marines total, so they're almost a chapter unto themselves, but they're all little bits and pieces from other chapters that were sent here. And of course, that was all orchestrated by the Dark Eldar, who were hoping to really wipe the board and mop up very nice with this execution of this. So they both made sure all these messages got to where they were going. They embellished them for people who needed embellishing. They convinced people of the strategic importance of the Psychic sector for the people who thought that would matter. And by one means or another, they helped to assemble this absolutely colossal force. Until Gilliman ruined it by saying, hey, that's an obvious trap, everybody get out of there. So, moving on from that, regiments. We have, obviously, the things you've seen, Krieg, Cadians. There's also going to be Vostroyan Firstborn who are here. There's also at least a small element of the Iron Legion here. A fair amount of Calambian Patriots and other Zectec sector homebrew regiments as well. Oh yes, and Ratlings. You'll see that there are some Ratlings here as well. So, the convents. There's only two. I assume that by convents you mean orders of Sisters of Battle. So there's only two orders that are present here. There's the Order of the Martyred Lady, the Order of Our Martyred Lady. They're very popular, they're very widespread. They're probably the most widespread order of the Sisters of Battle. And then there is an order that is native to the Zectec sector. They are the Order of the Emperor's Bride. And they're fairly different in their specific doctrine and the reason of their formation, but they are very, very similar in their combat doctrine and the way and reason they fight. So that's them there. Also, several forces of 3 different Forge Worlds are here that are fully cohesive, that managed to evacuate almost their entire planet's populations. So those Forge Worlds are present here in force, representing the Mechanicus, but I don't have their names on hand. But they are here, and there's 4 of them, so there you go. Let me see. What are the numbers of the Imperial forces in the Star Wars galaxy? Okay, I'm going to have to put a pin in that. I have that written down somewhere, but I don't have access to that right now. So we're just going to have to move on to the next one. Honestly, you should probably just wait and see, and it'll be revealed to you through the story. Are there more Inquisitors in the Star Wars galaxy, or is this Inquisitor the only one present? So, I'm a bit hesitant to reveal that. There are other elements of the Inquisition present here that are not under the direct command of the Inquisitor that you saw. That being said, whether or not... where was I? I'm sorry, I drifted off. Whether or not Inquisitor Tarweiler is the only one present... you'll have to wait and see if he's the actual only Inquisitor here, but I can confirm that there are other Inquisitorial forces that were present within the fleet that do not belong to him. So those will be interesting as they reveal themselves. Regarding the Inquisitor we saw, what is his Ordo and what caused his drastic change? Okay, so he's not quite as shark-looking as the picture would have you believe, because of course that picture doesn't actually represent him. It's just one of the closest things you could find to him. He has shark teeth. He has very sharp shark-like teeth. He's got very smooth skin and he's bald. He's also got black eyes. Aside from that, though, he does look fairly human. Not that looks tremendously human. He did that on purpose. This Inquisitor in particular is a very big fan of surgical augmentation, especially for the purposes of appearance. Whether he's going into disguise, whether he's going into diplomacy, or whether he's doing what he's normally doing, which is intimidating the shit out of Imperial forces, for which he prefers this kind of appearance, he has no qualms about going under the knife to accomplish this. He understood very early on that Jedi are only strong when they're serene, and the moment they start losing their serenity and start losing their cool, they get drastically weaker, and it becomes much harder for them to tell the future to survive, and they begin falling. So, because of this, he altered his appearance to facilitate this. Not that he wouldn't keep this appearance normally either. He would keep something like this on almost all the time, because he loves to scare Imperials into helping to obey him. I mean, his blood is pure, it's all just surgery, so he can get a blood test immediately to show that he has no elements of mutation. His rosette is legitimate. He definitely is an Inquisitor, and he can prove it. And so when you're dealing with a guy who looks like a mutant or a monster, but he is in fact your boss, it puts you in a kind of off guard that most people simply cannot handle, and it makes them very easy for him to handle, and that's why he does that. As for his Ordo, he is not Ordo Xenos Hereticus or Malleus. He is actually of an entirely different Ordo. People often forget that it's only about 40% of the Ordos are Xenos, Malleus, and Hereticus, and the other 60% is divided between an uncountable amount of both sub-orders of the previously mentioned orders and completely independent minor orders that are either not well known, utterly secret, or simply not widely supported. He is a member of such an order. So, let's see. And I think that's all your questions. Happy to answer your questions, Spook. So let's see where we're at. Yeah, so it's getting kind of late. I'm going to go ahead and answer one more Q&A, unless it's very, very long, then I'll only answer part of it. And then after that, I think we'll go ahead and call it a day. So, let's look. Let's see. I see. Spook, you have the next Q&A as well. Let's see. Can you please make the Electro Priest X Ahsoka ship... Baka! Stop it! Stop it! No. What is this? The Krieger and his harem. I'm not reading this. Stop. Ship whatever you like, okay? But keep it safe for work at the very least, okay? God. Just... ship clean. Let's see. Q&A, and this is for Nerali Bolateev, I think is what your name is how you say it. And you have a Russian picture, as your name would suggest. Let's see. Do you think that GW will ever truly bring back Malal Malice? No, I don't. And the reason is entirely because of legal reasons. If they ever brought back Malal or Malice, and if they did it before the author who made it up dies, then the author who made up Malal and Malice can claim creative ownership of Malal and Malice. And because Malal and Malice are thereby his property and will cause legal issues and profit sharing from GW, the chances of them ever doing that are next to nil. Now, if they could be fucking cool and just work something out nice and legal with this guy and surprise us, it would be amazing. But I don't foresee that, as much as I do hope for it. How will Palpatine and Dooku react to the Imperial's usage of the dark side of the Force? I'd imagine a bit of anger and fear, but most importantly curiosity on how they can learn to use it. So, Palpatine and Dooku... You know what? I'm actually not going to answer that one. you guys will have a lot of fun seeing their reactions without me having to tell you anything. And you'll see most of that in Season 2. But trust me, you're gonna find quite a bit of enjoyment in that, and I don't want to spoil any of it. So, moving on to the next one. How large is the Republic army assaulting Axum? I'd reckon a couple million clones. I actually have a number for this. In fact, I may have even mentioned these numbers in The Republic Strikes Back when they first arrive. So I'd check back there to see if I have numbers written down, and if I do, and you're having trouble hearing me say them, they should be in the closed captions and subtitles. But I can't answer that right this moment because I simply don't have all the numbers in front of me at the moment. Let me see here. How large is the Republic army? Oh no, my bad. I already read that. Wouldn't most of the more humanoid aliens in Star Wars Galaxy be classified as abhumans at least? Clearly most of them should largely share a lot of human DNA if they're able to breed with humans and produce offspring. Hell, if the fucking Beastmen are not considered mutants, barely, then most of the differences are merely superfluous to the Imperials. Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes and no. So, because of the Eldar, Imperials are used to... Because of the Eldar and Tau, Imperials are used to there being aliens that can look humanish and not be human at all. And to be clear, from everything we've seen, despite the fact that you could screw an Eldar and it would all work apparently, though you wouldn't produce hybrids, the Eldar are completely different from Imperials. In fact, like from Imperials, they're completely different from humans. It is almost implied that Eldar are much more slug-like on the inside than they are like primates. So there really shouldn't be any compatibility there. That being said, this compatibility that you're speaking of, it will be eventually noticed. By whom it will be noticed, and in what way, and what will happen, and what classification that will take on, you will have to wait and see. Know that I have definitely already thought of that far in advance. It is definitely already written into the larger script. You will definitely see results from that. And there are Imperials who are both in favor, or rather not in favor. There are both Imperials who would be incentivized to accept that there is a large ab-human presence as opposed to a large alien presence. And there are humans who would be extremely loath to include this many ab-humans into the categorization and into what is acceptable because of their incentives and proclivities. And we'll leave it at that. So, I think that will be the very last question I answer, because at this point we are getting up in there in the minutes. So, let me think. Was there any last thing, any last ground, any last words I needed to cover with you guys? I may be taking a break kind of soon. I'm feeling a little worn down. Though I don't think I'm taking the break yet. I think I can I think I can keep going, and who knows, I might even work through it and it doesn't bug me. But there have been just a few things occurring in life that have been distracting me from things like this, which of course are the most important things. I don't think anyone would deny that, right? So, I may take a break a little later on. Go ahead and keep an eye out for that, or just, be anticipating that might happen, so you're not too disappointed should it happen. But that aside, I think that I will wish you an excellent day, an even better week. Remember to appreciate the people who are important to you in your life. Remember to give them a call. Remember to keep them in your life. They won't always be there. And as always, I'll see you next time.